Never see me coming, I'm a landmine. Yeah, I ain't taking orders in command like. Yeah, you about to see me on demand like. You know on demand. If you ain't know, you about to understand. Yeah, I got the team by my side, right hand. Yeah,
I do think it's a good time to tee up another hot take for Ev here. Zach, I'll let you talk about it. Russell Wilson getting traded to the Denver Broncos right after Aaron Rodgers signs a 4-year extension with Green Bay for $200 million. Man deserved to get paid, and he got paid. But I think the most funny part is, and y'all let me know if you disagree with this, I'm pretty sure that Seattle basically went to, I'm pretty sure Denver basically went to Seattle and just everything they packaged together to offer the Packers, I think they just took that exact deal and turned it and just sent it to Seattle. And Seattle was like, yeah, cool, that's good. We'll take that. I think, because, I mean, come on, he signs the deal and like 3 hours later that deal happens and Russell Wilson's getting sent to the Broncos. So I think that's what happened. The immediate conversation we had was now that division just added another quarterback in Russell Wilson paired with Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Derek Carr. And I'm going to leave it at that because we've been talking NBA. I'll let Zach pick it up and then I'll rebuttal later. But I can't wait for Evan to give his other hot take here. So go ahead.
Before you go, Zach, just to add aside, my favorite part was Schefter tweeted out like later. He was like, it was something like, you know, the Wilson trade and the Rodgers signing had nothing to do with each other. And I was watching the McAfee video and they were like, yeah, okay. But it was like, it was pretty awesome tweet. But go ahead, Zach.
Actually, yeah, jumping off the McAfee thing, my favorite part is, I mean, Aaron Rodgers even tweeted recently, hey, I know there's erroneous contract publications of like my 4-year, $200 million deal from Ian Rappaport, and that's not true. So I'm happy to be a Packer for the remainder of my career, but like also that deal is not necessarily finalized. Now, one that is finalized is the one that with Russ Wilson, and that is very interesting to me. And poor Raiders is right. Shout out Dolan. Because I couldn't agree more. And I feel like if I'm a Raiders GM, I actually now shop Derek Carr, because as good as Derek Carr is, there is no way the Raiders compete in that division. And we can jump back to that, but just real quick overall with my thoughts on the Russ Wilson trade is, you know, he's most likely going to approve this trade, a part of his no trade clause there. Denver's a great location to be in. He's got Jerry Jeudy, he's got Cortland Sutton, two young prodigies. Pretty decent line, and then the running backs are just unbelievable, and Javonte. So really excited for this. They've got a great defense with outstanding corners. You know, Patrick Surtain, Fuller. I really like where this is going. Now, what's interesting is I believe Denver gave up 2 first rounds, 2 second rounders, a 4th rounder, Noah Fant. And then I believe there was like a defensive lineman, Shelby something. I forget what his last name is.
Shelby.
That
Harris.
is a lot of players. And I mean, hey, look, the Rams went out and they shelled out mean cash to get their guy, Matt Stafford. And at the time, there were a lot of people who were like, ooh, the Rams might have shelled out way too much. I don't know if Stafford's worth that. Is any player worth that? And then obviously the answer to that question is yes, because he took them to the Super Bowl and they won it. So, you know, sometimes first rounders are not as valuable as people think, and it's worth giving up multiple first round picks because sometimes first rounders are bust. We're going to get into one later today by the name of Calvin Ridley. So overall, I like it. I'll turn this to you though, as a Washington Commanders fan. You could have gotten your guy, Russ Wilson. Apparently the trade that you guys offered was immediately declined. Did you guys realistically think you had a shot?
The reason they weren't trading under the NFC East, they came out and said that. That's why they turned it down.
NFC.
We offered 3 firsts and we're willing to include players, presumably like defensive line studs who would have been better than the defensive line guy they gave. So our package actually was better from a draft capital perspective, and we were willing to include players. They said, well, 1, the Seahawks weren't going to trade him to the NFC, and then 2, Russ didn't want to go there anyway. He liked the better receivers in Denver, plus he wanted to stay closer to the West Coast. So realistically, we never had a shot from the beginning, but it's not because we couldn't give them an offer like that, or we're willing to give them an offer like that.
Gotcha.
But you know, that's what it takes to get your guy. I mean, it's a lot. Although 2 firsts isn't bad, but you know, seconds aren't anything to frown out. Drew Lock is trash. That's nothing for me. Noah Fant actually is the big one, because you know, like you have Sutton, who's okay. Judy, I think, is going to be good, but he hasn't really shown it yet, especially last year when they played him out of the slot. Like Tim Patrick said, I'd find depth receiver. AJ Hamler hasn't really developed. So like, and now that you don't have Noah Fant, offensive line is, I think, back half, if not back 10, or it was last year. Obviously the defense is very good, but I don't know. For me, this doesn't put them definitively above the Raiders or the Chargers, in my opinion. I think I would probably pick them out of the three, but I think they're still all three jumbled in there. And, you know, obviously we need to see what Russ looks like after, you know, whole full healthy offseason and new coach. And, you know, we'll see. I think all three of those teams are still jumbled in kind of an AFC wildcard jumble after the Chiefs.
So for me, I 100% think it puts them over the Raiders, and honestly probably over the Chargers as well, just because of Russ's experience. I think Herbert is the second best. I think Herbert, you could argue, could be better than Russell Wilson next season. It really just depends on Wilson's health, but Herbert has already shown massive improvement to the point where I think he could win MVP in the next year or two. I think he's very much capable of that, but obviously I'm not putting them over the Chiefs, and I don't think anybody is right off the bat because Mahomes is so good. Two things I want to allude to. One, I want to talk about first, when you guys brought up the Commanders, so I'm going to talk about them real quick. I don't think that would have been a good trade for him. Not because I don't think Russell Wilson's worth paying a huge price for. It's because you only pay that price if you think that you could get him right now and then compete for a Super Bowl in the next year or two. And if you guys gave away 3 first-round picks and one of your defensive lineman studs, do I think the Commanders would be ready to go win a Super Bowl next year or two? I don't think so personally. I think you're better off having 3 first-round picks, continuing to build, finding the right quarterback, and keeping your defensive line intact the way that it is. So I personally think that would have not been a great trade for him, but I guess y'all have been searching for a franchise quarterback for so long. Maybe that's why you were willing to give up as much as you were potentially willing to give up.
I agree. Just to jump in, I agree. I wouldn't have wanted to do that. Okay. But carry on.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. And then the other thing I'll say is I'm not really sure I know Russ waived his no trade clause, and I think maybe Denver somewhere he did want to go as far as one of his potential destinations. But what are you really getting out of Denver that you didn't have in Seattle? Like maybe a marginal upgrade on defense, and they definitely have the better secondary. Part of the issue with Seattle is actually, I wouldn't even say they have the better secondary, because Jamal Adams at safety, if you're considering that as a part of the equation, Jamal Adams is better than any defensive player on either of those two teams. But then on the flip side to that, offensively speaking, neither of those offensive lines are great. I mean, Denver's is better than Seattle's. I won't dispute that. But the receiving weapons of Seattle are definitely better. I mean, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett versus Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. DK Metcalf is easily the best out of those 4. And you could argue Tyler Lockett's better than Jeudy and better than Sutton. It's a close conversation. I won't dispute that. But you're downgrading in receivers. That I just don't think is questionable, because Metcalf is just beyond any of them. And then run game wise, yeah, there's injuries. But if Carson's healthy, he's arguably as good as Melvin Gordon. Javonte Williams might be the difference. We'll see just going forward. But I don't think the line makes their run game that much better. So it's just a little confusing to me, because I don't think it made Russ's life that much easier. And if anything, he's probably in a harder division now than he was before, which is saying something, because he just went from one of the hardest divisions. I won't say harder, but not an easier division. You know what I'm saying? It's not like his life got easier. So it's a little surprising that he would uproot everything and be like, I'm going to move to Denver, play in that high altitude, be colder than I've ever been, and play with lesser offensive weapons because I have a better chance to win there. I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. So that's another statement I had to make. And great trade for the Seahawks. Amazing trade for the Seahawks. If I'm the Seahawks, I'm feeling like a winner here, because I don't think the Seahawks were going to win a Super Bowl with Russell Wilson in the next 4 or 5 years. After 4 or 5 years, I don't think Russell Wilson was going to be himself anymore. And they got 2 first rounds, 2 second rounds, Noah Fant. And even if they never use Drew Lock, that's still a great trade for him. I think, and one last point, I disagree about first-round picks being that valuable. It depends on your GM. If you're a team that can draft those first-round picks and those second-round picks are invaluable. When I look at my Colts or I look at Evans Commanders, our teams would be nothing the way they were if it wasn't for the way we drafted with our first and second round picks over the last 4 or 5 years. So I actually disagree with that personally.
Yeah, just to jump in on the receivers bit, like, yeah, they have some nice young receivers, but they don't have this like elite like core of weapons, especially without Fant right now. So that's where when he was like, oh yeah, I like the Broncos receivers better than the Commanders, like, sure, holistically, but of those two teams, we have the best receiver in general with McLaurin. But I don't know, I digress. And then
I disagree there. I gotta pump the brakes, because I think what Russ Wilson's looking at is future receiving ability. And I can tell you right now that Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are better route runners than DK and Tyler Lockett. I think Tyler Lockett and DK bring very special things to the table. DK's a freak of nature, and he's one of the most physical receivers I've ever seen. Tyler Lockett's great on drag routes and like kind of routes like across the field. And he's a legit deep threat. But in terms of route running ability, I think you guys are going to be shocked when you guys watch Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. Give them a year where they're healthy, and you guys will be amazed.
No, I'm not shocked.
Phenomenal.
I want to clarify, Zach. I'm not shocked. I think it's a great receiving core. I think Jerry Jeudy, because he got hurt last year, I think was going to be his breakout year, and we're really going to see some of that potential that we saw from Bama when he got drafted. I'm not disputing that at all. Like there's no disputing. But what I'm saying is he's not getting an upgrade at the receiver position. And even though I think Sutton is actually a very solid receiver, he's been hurt. So I think, and last year when he came back, he wasn't that great, but part of that was because of the quarterback play. So I don't disagree with you. I think they have a very solid young wide receiver crew for the next several years for Wilson to throw to. But I do not agree that they're better than DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, because DK in his first 2 years in the NFL has been considerably better than those guys. And it's not like he's reached his potential yet either. I might agree with you that those guys might be better overall route runners, but I don't think they're the better receiver. And a lot of times, because of how good DK Metcalf is, people overlook the take the top off ability that Lockett has. And that's something Denver doesn't have. Like, it's not like Sutton is going to blow you away with like 40, 50-yard touchdowns, which is actually Russell's strength, right? Like, his strength is the deep ball. So, like, I'm just saying, like, it's not like he's upgrading at the receiver position. I actually believe the Seahawks receivers were better. And I don't think there's an argument to be made that DK Metcalf isn't the best receiver out of all the ones that we just spoke about, because his play and his statistics and his success and just his track record have proven that. And one other thing I'll say, Eb, is no disrespect to Terry McLaurin. He's got the potential. And he, at this stage in his career, he is better than Jeudy and he is better than Sutton. But if you're asking me if I'd rather have Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton versus Terry McLaurin and nobody, I'll take Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. And I understand you signed some other receivers, but I made the point last year that Curtis Samuel is not as good as you guys are making him out to be, and I stand by that. And I think he proved me right last season. So I would 100% take Denver's overall receiving core versus the football team's the Commanders' overall receiving core going forward. Definitely take the Seahawks and the Broncos over the Commanders holistically when it comes to receiving.
I don't disagree with that, but of all those guys, you have two decent receivers. Like, I don't think, Sutton's okay. Like, Jeudy, I like, but he hasn't done anything yet. Partially due to injury last year, but his rookie season wasn't good at all. And to your point, I think you hit the nail on the head with he did not make his life easier with this trade by any means. I think he is leaving a really good division as well. So yeah, he's coming from the NFC, but that division is obviously stacked. But the Rams will start to decline, not this year necessarily, but they'll start to decline with how much they had to give up for Stafford. So and the Niners need Lance to work, and then who knows what the Cardinals are going to be like. So he definitely did not make his life easier. That doesn't make it the wrong move, but it's definitely a harder path out there.
It's going to be interesting to see the different style of offense that Russ kind of dives into, because he's really only played with Pete Carroll. And I think you can almost just because of the years that Russ Wilson's played with that beautiful deep ball and, kind of those like long drawn out play action plays, I think you're going to see more passes kind of come out of the ball, or they come out of his hand a little bit quicker. Jerry Jeudy and Cortland quick off their routes, I would say more capable route running ability, especially small to midterm routes. So, you might see kind of an offensive schematic change, and I would be curious to see how Russ fits in that role. But in terms of both of your teams, Rodgers is gone, Russ Wilson's gone. Faster than I realized. I mean, if you're Indianapolis and Washington,
Keep Wentz.
top 10 teams in cap space right now, what do you guys both do to shell out to get maybe a Jimmy G, a Deshaun Watson, a Matt Ryan technically? I mean, there's plenty of options right now if you guys want to spend that money.
My answer is easy. Keep Wentz. Do not go after any of those guys. I don't think any of those guys are an upgrade in terms of long-term potential. I think Wentz had a perfectly fine season. I think he's getting a little too much flack. I went on the air last week and I said this as well. I'm not getting rid of Wentz unless I can get Wilson or Rodgers. And at this point, we can't get Wilson or Rodgers. I'm keeping Wentz because if he played the whole season last year without having to be injured in the preseason, and if we didn't have to figure it out the first 4 or 5 games, I fully believe we're a playoff team, and I fully believe we can give anybody a run for their money. I don't think Wentz is the greatest. I don't dispute that, but I do think that we have the run game and the supplemental players around him to be successful until we find a long-term solution. But as of right now, there's nobody else worth trading for. Even if we don't go win the Super Bowl next year, I still think we'll be a playoff team with Wentz because we'll have a full offseason to practice. You do not at the end of the day, I'll trust Chris Ballard, whatever he does. I have full faith in Ballard and Reich, but I just think if I was in his shoes right now, I don't see a better option. I'm not trading for Jimmy G for 1 year and paying him essentially the same amount of money I would have paid Wentz. I'm not trading for Matt Ryan because even though I think Ryan's probably the better game manager, he's older, and I don't want to be paying him like $40 million a year to be 40 years old. That's not what I'm rooting for. And there's just no other options out there. If we cut Wentz, I'd rather have Ryan Fitzpatrick than give up any draft capital and give up any money to go get the guys that you're mentioning, unless Derek Carr is on the table, like you mentioned, Zach, at which point I would entertain that if you're willing to cut Wentz and get Derek Carr. But I don't think he will be because I don't. The Raiders made the playoffs with them last year. I think it takes him having 3 or 4 rough seasons before Derek Carr is even considered being traded after he was so great to get them into the playoffs last year with all the hardships they had. So my answer is keep Wentz. Keep Wentz. That's what I would do.
We kind of glossed over Zach's take about the Raiders should all of a sudden blow it up because the Broncos got Russell Wilson. We kind of overshadowed that. Now I think it's
so much value for Carr.
It's not a take that I'm going to completely rip you and throw you off the call like some of the things you've said in the past. But it's an interesting discussion. But yeah, I vehemently disagree with it. And we did talk a lot Washington and Colts last week. The interesting news this week is that the Watson market is picking up a lot. I think he has some kind of civil lawsuit coming up this week that might give some information. So, but the problem is you can't really get him until after free agency. So I think I don't know if I'm going to say this is what Washington is planning on doing, but I think this is probably what they should be doing is. And I know the Eagles have done the same of send their own investigators to try and figure out what in the mess is going to happen with Deshaun. So I think the move is you spend the next 8 days before free agency getting as much information on if you think it's doable to get Watson and what kind of suspension he could serve and all that kind of jazz. And then if you think that, okay, in Washington's case, I think you could even wait out a suspension of up to a year, given Cy said, I don't think even with him, we're going to win a Super Bowl this year. So I think you could wait out a suspension, especially if it helps reduce draft capital. So if you think it's possible you could acquire him, you got to figure that out in the next 8 days. If you don't, I'm driving the Mitch Trubisky bandwagon and then drafting someone. I love Mitch. And then you're picking up one of the free agents, pairing him with a rookie in our case. Or if you think you can get Watson, you wait until draft season, you try and make a trade happen before the draft. And if not, you use your first round pick on a rookie instead of a second. So I think that's what they're tentatively planning on doing.
Zach, to be clear, I will pay you to go be the quarterback of the Colts and run an O formation, backyard football, before I have us pay any amount of money to Mitch Trubisky to come be our starting quarterback. You want to talk about absurd takes? Why are you okay with Mitch Trubisky, Evan? That is
go with Jameis.
Have you seen the whole NFL wants Mitch Trubisky, dude?
The whole NFL has lost their minds in the
dude, what is not to like about a guy that definitively has the talent to be a top 15, top 10 quarterback given where he's drafted? He works his tail off, according to everyone that knows him. And he was just in an awful situation in Chicago. Plus, he's had a year to learn under, Josh Allen's not some veteran guy, but like all the buzz on Mitch Trubisky from people that know him is awesome. And clearly Matt Nagy was an absolute fraud, as I've been saying for years, which is clear now. So like his situation in Chicago was a mess. Like I get it's obviously a huge gamble, but you're not paying him a ton of money. Granted, his market is heating up quite a bit, which is a concern, but like there's a lot to be optimistic about with Mitch. And if your other option, if you're getting
Mitch Trubisky for $1 million, sure, give him a shot. But if you're telling me Mitch, okay, listen, first of all, no disrespect to him. If he's working his tail off, good for him. But if he's a guy who works his tail off and has consistently been one of the worst 5 to 10 quarterbacks in the NFL,
he's made 2 Pro Bowls.
Regardless of who your coach is, I don't care. You were
Sorry,
number 1 overall.
Go check the stats. Go to his stats. He's a former Pro Bowl and playoff quarterback. Granted, they had a great defense, but go look at the stats. He isn't as bad as people think he was.
Dude, he is not good. And at the end of the day, like that is not the guy. You know what the most frustrating thing is? I'm gonna say all this, and then Chris Ballard very well could go after Mitch Trubisky. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. But I want to make one thing clear. I am not getting like you said this about the Commanders, so I'm not gonna say this is the take for the Colts, but just personally, I'm not investing in Mitch Trubisky unless you get him for like $1 million. And even that I think is overpaying because I don't think he deserves any sort of a contract right now, given the fact that he has not been relevant in years. And he's like, you might think that one season of relative decency is worth that, but to me, I don't think so. I just have no faith in the Mitch Trubisky brand thing. And at the same time, like, why are y'all running away from Heineke so fast when you guys were all up on the Heineke bandwagon 1 year ago? This is one thing that bothers me, right? You guys like a year ago are like, oh yeah, let's roll with Heineke. Like, let's give Heineke the opportunity. Heineke's good. Heineke's this. Heineke's that. 1 year later, you're talking to me about Mitch Trubisky. Like, come on, bro. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely
okay.
ridiculous.
Sai, first off, go look at the stats. Mitch is not as bad as people make him out to be. The Colts are in a very different situation. Like Mitch doesn't make sense for you guys because you guys have an upside quarterback already. Whereas Washington, it's like my options here. You're saying I can have Mitch for say 10. I can have Teddy Bridgewater for 16. I know what Teddy Bridgewater is, and I know Teddy Bridgewater cannot win me a Super Bowl. That's why I wanted Mitch last year, and Ryan Fitzpatrick I wasn't too thrilled about because I knew Ryan Fitzpatrick can't get me there. Mitch probably can't get me there, but I at least have a little bit of upside to envision, right? And obviously you're pairing him with a draft pick with that in mind, but he gives you a little bit of upside there.
Ev, is he worth $10 million more?
Yeah,
is he worth $10 million when he already gave Heineke his contract? Mitch Trubisky
Heineke makes like $2 million a year, dude.
No. My point is, okay, maybe this is just where we fundamentally disagree. And Zach, I'll let you give your take because we can go back and forth on this all day. But maybe where we fundamentally disagree is I think you have a negative 5% chance of winning a Super Bowl with Mitch Trubisky. And that's not even a testament to Mitch Trubisky. That's a testament to you guys needing a lot from your respective quarterback right now for you to do it. Because all he has is Terry McLaurin, and he has Zach's ex-quarterback from Virginia Tech who plays twice a year at the tight end position on offense, and Antonio Gibson with not the best offensive line and a defense that needs to address it.
A top 5 offensive line, a better offensive line than you have.
Okay, first of all, that it is not a better offensive line than we have.
Go to PFF.
Dude, Pro Football Focus is not everything. If we just relied on Pro Football
he's trying to throw you off. Evan knows he's wrong, so he's trying to get you mad on a different subject.
Are you joking?
They weren't even close last year.
You think because we had injuries.
So did we.
If Quentin Nelson,
we had plus size of male models starting at one point this season, and we still finished 6th.
Yeah, and that's why Jonathan Taylor just had one of the greatest rushing seasons of all time, right? Because our offensive line wasn't top 5. Like, come on, get out of here. Quentin Nelson, Braden Smith, or Sheriff's good, but outside of him, we're way deeper. That's not even. Come on, man. Quentin Nelson's the best offensive lineman in the NFL. You could probably argue at this stage.
You need 5. Anyway, you guys didn't finish top 10. And the point about Heineke is you're totally content having a quarterback that can't win you a Super Bowl. Whereas my point is like, why not try and find someone that can? Like, I agree that chances are low, but like in your case, like you're totally fine with Wentz who can't win you a Super Bowl. Like, whereas your front office is saying, let's get rid of him because we know he's not the guy. And yeah, is there a guy out there? Probably not, to be honest, but let's at least try.
Zach, what's your take on Mr. Trubisky? Your honest take on Mr. Trubisky for $10 million?
Well, what's interesting, well, first of all, actually, like, I agree with Evan in terms of the monetary figure. I think 10 million is 10 million. I mean, they have so much money to spend in cap. Why not take the experiment? So I lean Evan's direction there. The problem with Mitch Trubisky, though, is he's very inconsistent. Talk about stats. He doesn't throw over 60%. He doesn't complete a 60% completion. And despite the fact that I feel like Washington could do something interesting with his running game and make things interesting there, especially with Curtis Samuel and Antonio Gibson, something that's interesting. But in terms of longevity, that team's not going to win you the division. And so I kind of lean size direction there. I think there's better quarterbacks that you could potentially target. Honestly, maybe even Wentz in Washington. I would not be surprised if that actually happened. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But hey, switching on over to my team, and probably something that we certainly haven't really discussed yet, but I feel is important, is Calvin Ridley was cited earlier this morning and suspended for the whole season being 2022 for illegal sports gambling on NFL games as an NFL player. Can't really tell you the last time that's happened in recent memory. I think the last time actually was about 5 or 6 years ago, and the player who did that appealed it. It was granted, so he had to sit his season out, and then he just never played in the NFL again. And I fear that that's exactly what's going to happen with Calvin Ridley, because on top of the stupidity of betting $1,500 on 3 parlays that didn't hit, probably because he bet on the Falcons each time. And by the way, people are like, oh, well, at least he bet for his team. We were playing the Jaguars, for crying out loud. I mean, like, how bad does that have to be when people are like, oh yeah, like Calvin Ridley at least bet for his team. Like that's honorable in a certain stance. I'm like, dude, he bet for the Falcons to beat the Jaguars. It's not like Newton's law here by any means. So outside of that, I think it's pretty sad, honestly, because he was supposed to be an icon that we were going to pay for years and years. I mean, arguably coming off his contract year, giving him a $17 million a year contract, and for him to bet $1,500 that really cost him $11 million in his current salary for next year, is pretty sad to see. And I think one thing that will kind of challenge him for the rest of his career is next time he drops a pass, it's going to be in the back of the head of a GM, of a coach, of an official, of a fan. Did he do that on purpose? If he doesn't run his route extra hard because maybe it's a running play, he's trying to conserve energy for a big third down the next play. People are like, is he trying to throw the game? Is he not trying hard enough? So there's more implications to this than people realize. And honestly, that I think Calvin realizes himself with just random tweets that he kind of popped off today saying, oh, I don't agree with the suspension, and I only bet $1,500. Like, I'm trying to get his side of the story, but I think the problem at the end of the day, when we ignore monetary consequences, is just a reputational risk. And I really do think, I mean, the Falcons are going to release him pretty shortly here, and I just don't see him jumping on any team anytime soon. But wanted to hear y'all's take on it, and what your thoughts were.
First of all, I thought you were going to roast him, and you actually went very easy on him, given the way you teed this up. Zach, roast the guy. Okay, let's just be real here.
That's because I've gone over this a couple times. I was like, oh man, now I feel bad. This is still an ex-Falcon. He's still got a special place in my heart.
Okay, well, I'll do it for you then. It's actually ridiculous. Okay, here's what I'll say. First and foremost, I want to clarify. I actually love watching Calvin Ridley play football, and I'm rooting for him to play again. I'm not saying what he did should eliminate his opportunity to play football again. Obviously, we all make mistakes, and we all need to grow and do better in a lot of ways. And it's just an opportunity for growth for him. And the other thing I will say is mental health is not something to take lightly. And I know that's a big reason of why he stepped away last year. So I don't want to make any assumptions on that. The part that sucks for the team holistically, and this is something that, like, I think maybe he needs to hold himself accountable for, is he stepped away because of his mental health, and he needed that break. And I got total respect for that. But if you're going to step away from your mental health, the last thing you should be doing when you're not with your team playing football with them is betting. I mean, that's not respectful to yourself, and that's not respectful to your team. And it's just, and if it was for $1,500, why, right? Like, what is $1,500 on a parlay in the grand scheme of things when you are a player that got drafted in the first round that your team traded up for, invested heavy capital in to bring onto your team with the veteran presence in a guy like Matt Ryan? Why do the $1,500? So in a lot of ways, I don't understand the decision. But the one thing I will say is he's a human being. He's got an opportunity to learn from his mistakes the same way any of us would. And I just hope he does, because he's an incredible talent, a guy that could go out there and, be one of the best receivers in the NFL going forward. He had an amazing rookie year. And I legitimately thought, especially with Julio kind of passing the torch, that Ridley would take over and become one of those staple receivers for the next decade. I don't think that's not going to be the case anymore, though. Like, I think he sits out a season, and I think a team will sign him in a heartbeat because they see the potential in him. But in order for them to do that, I don't think his response should be, I only bet $1,500, or, I don't have a gambling problem. I think his response should be, I apologize because I made a mistake. And at the end of the day, like, to be like, hey, it's an opportunity for me to step outside the box, be like, I screwed up and it's time for me to grow and do better. And that's ultimately, if he gave that response, then yeah, of course people are going to be critical for a little while, but he'll be able to bounce back from that. I mean, it's not a good thing to do, but it's something that I don't think should ruin his career, because he's a great player. And I believe that he could be a very good guy. So I'm not trying to take away from him that way, but at the same time, of course, like, just like anybody else, he's going to get the scrutiny for sitting out last year and with respect to his mental health, but then choosing to bet on his team. I mean, regardless of who you bet on, like, he knew you were not allowed to do that. Like, that's very clear. And at the end of the day, I just hope he feels the ability to grow from that and come back. Because I do think that he has a bright future ahead of him if he can just, show that growth and bounce back, and somebody will sign him. I'm actually surprised the Falcons are going to release him. Like, I know that it's not like easy to hold on to somebody after a situation like that, but at the same time, they traded up. It was a first round pick, and he's still got a couple years on his contract, right? Or I don't know. Like, so I'm a little surprised by that personally, because I do think somebody's going to sign him the moment he's allowed to be signed. But that's my own opinion.
Yeah, I largely agree. I'm kind of on the lesser side, though. Like, I mean, the NFL, like, they had to make an example out of him with how much sports betting has gotten legalized. Like, this is probably going to become a problem for them in the future. So they really had to make an example out of him. But as a sports betting aficionado, like, I'm like, is this really that big of a deal? Like, in his case, when he's sitting at home, he doesn't have an effect on the game. Does he really even have any inside information that would make him want to bet that? I think they've already said that he didn't. Like, obviously it was dumb. Like, he needs to know the rules. Like, that goes without saying. But spending him a whole year was clearly just making an example out of him. And Zach, to your point, and like some of the stuff Sai mentioned, like, you can't, I don't care if that's how you feel, like, you can't be saying some of the things he's saying and like, oh, it's only 1,500. Like, that's not a good way to go about it. But I don't know. For me, it's kind of whatever. It's kind of a bummer he's suspended for a full year, but I get they had to make an example out of him. And yeah, I'm kind of surprised they released him as well. And I don't think he'll have any problems getting a job in the future as long as he kind of starts to own up to it a little bit. And
all right, fellas. Well, hey, thanks again. If you haven't, if you like our podcast, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you disagree with any of our takes, which I'm sure is the majority of this podcast, let us know in the comment section. We'll get you on. But outside of that, thank you for your support each week. And we will see you guys very, very soon for March Madness. So thanks again. And that was Mondays Down South.
Never see me coming, I'm a landmine. Yeah, I ain't taking orders in command, like, yeah, you about to see me on demand, like, on demand. If you ain't know, you about to understand. Yeah, I got the team by my side, right hand. Yeah, take